Welcome to Advancing Talent Acquisition, the Advanced RPO podcast. Today, I'm joined by Steve Swan, CEO of the Swan Group and host of the Biotech Bytes podcast. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. This is great. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. You and I had the chance to talk, I think it was last week, very briefly, kind of talked a little bit about what we were going to cover today. Before we get into that, though, I just found your background and your experience and your story so fascinating. So I'd love it if you would just share that with our listeners who may not know who you are or have had the chance to talk to you before.
Sure. A real brief intro. Steve Swan, owner and president of the Swan Group. Been doing this for 26 years. Took over from my mother, Barbara, who did it 50 plus years. She started getting into recruitment. I'm one of four boys. I'm number three. That probably says something about me. I don't know. But she got into recruitment because she needed help. She needed help around the house, domestic help around the house. So her and a neighbor looked through the yellow pages, didn't find anybody that could get them a babysitter. So they started interviewing and placing what we call today nannies, but it was babysitters back then, and then grew it to about a half a dozen offices, and then got into executive assistants. And then she got adept at different typewriters as so different executive assistants would use. And that was technology. That was technology back then. So she became the technology guru, and the rest is kind of history. I joined her 26 years ago, and all we do is technology of all shapes and sizes to biotech and pharma. And that's where we are today in New Jersey.
That's awesome. I love that story so much. Every once in a while you talk to somebody who talks about their roots in staffing and or recruiting, and it comes out of something like that. Somebody had a need for something, couldn't find it, started it, and it has evolved into something just phenomenal. So I love that story.
It's awesome. She was always after me to join her. And finally, right before we had our first little one, who's now 25, I said, sure, well, let's give it a shot. And here I am today, still doing it. So it's fun.
And any of the siblings involved in the business at all?
No, they're not. None of them are. She never asked any of them. I don't know.
Oh, well, you're the special one then if she asked
I guess, or the only one that could take the beating. I'm not quite sure which.
Oh, goodness. Well, with all of the great experience you have in the biotech and pharma industry, and certainly with the IT professionals, I know that you've seen over the years just how much the industry has evolved and shifted. From your perspective, what has been the biggest shift that you've seen? And it could be, related to the IT profession in general, or it could be related to the industries that you're in, or anything else for that matter, technology, whatever it is. But I just love to hear from your perspective when you started versus where we're at now.
I think the biggest shift in my mind that's taken place is hiring managers and companies have gotten really used to finding the candidate that's got exactly what they're looking for, right? So, 26 years ago, it was kind of like, get me somebody with some of these skills and get me somebody that does this, this, and this. But I would say that a lot of what goes on today is really finding that individual that's got all the nice to haves and all the must haves all at the same time. So I think it got so, what's the word I'm looking for? Myopic, right? It's got so specific, and they're finding it because we can find it, right? Now it's a matter of finding it versus attracting it versus closing it, right? That's a whole different, that we can get to that later, but actually finding them and the individuals that have all those skill sets, you can do with technology, which technology has helped us do that,
And I'd love to hear your perspective too, just on companies needing to have a more open mindset, even about hiring for aptitude, right? Technology is changing really, really quickly right now and evolving. And there are skills that are needed out there that aren't being taught right now, right? A lot of it is kind of learning as you go and whatnot. So I'd love to hear your perspective and kind of what you're seeing and hearing, like how open are companies, especially when it comes to IT professionals, around hiring for aptitude or similar experiences or ability to learn versus actually having all of the skills that they need.
So it's kind of weird because what I just said is how we've come all the way to a point where the companies have gotten real myopic. At this point today, as I sit here, we're probably as far from the exact candidate as we were 20 plus years ago. And here's why, because, well, let me go all the way back. So my mother, she always, when she got people ready for interviews, she would say the top three skills you have to have during the interview process is a good attitude. Good attitude, good attitude, good attitude. And it would, like you just alluded to, it would work. It was great. Hiring managers wanted that. What I'm finding right now is with everything that's going on with AI and the internet is that companies are having a tough time filling these roles because they're getting flooded with candidates. They're getting, AI is finding them folks with exactly what they're looking for, good and bad. Reason why that's bad is because the candidates are writing their resumes to fit all the stuff to get past the AI, then to the human. And what managers are telling me, calling me and saying, okay, listen, I just interviewed 4 people and none of them can substantiate what's on their resume. They've written their resumes to get by my AI bot, and I got the resume, and here I am talking to this person, and they can't really, back up what's on the resume. So, they are starting to come to me. Some of them are coming to me and saying, "Okay, get me somebody that's got maybe half of what I'm looking for, but they got to be able to get along with the team, have the right personality for my organization, be driven by this, this, and this." So we're getting to that. But it's not all the way across the board. So I think that we're closer back to what we just talked about there
Yeah.
from 26 years ago, looking for the person with the good aptitude and the great personality, just because of being inundated by AI, and AI fighting AI with AI is leading them down I don't know, a dead end street almost sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and the EQ, right?
Yeah,
Those types of skills. That's the area when it comes to AI. Everybody loves AI, right? Everybody's
they do.
talking about how AI can do more for companies, especially when it comes to recruiting, and to the point you just made. But it's not. I still don't see, at least right now, may change in the future, it being able to actually gauge the right cultural fit, the
Correct.
ability to be curious and inquisitive and to learn, and those skills, the softer skills that actually, when partnered with the technical knowledge and the job skills, make you an incredibly strong candidate, right? So
Sure.
that's a gap right now too. And I'm just curious, how are you evaluating some of those things based on that feedback that you heard from that hiring
Well,
manager?
so storytelling is key, right? It's always been key, right? Being able to tell a story, being able to connect the dots and things like that. Even folks forever that have been involved with technology, the ones that can tell a story and can work with business become the more successful ones, right? They're both technical and business, business facing. And AI or computers yet can't really do that, right? It's going to be great at finding you, I don't know, a car, right? But you got to be able to check the boxes. AM, FM, Sirius XM, leather, sunroof. You can't do that with people, right? Cool person. What's cool person mean? Or flexible person. Well, what does that mean? So to again, I always call it the work in the middle. The work in the middle. Once you qualify the person before the offer comes, the work in the middle is understanding, the cultural fit, understanding that person, understanding the company. I call them drivers, right? Understanding the company's drivers, understanding the individual's drivers, and putting those together. The best situations are when you put those together, or in my opinion, the only situations are when you put those together. And when you put those together, it's a win-win on both sides. AI can't do that. I had a post that was going around on LinkedIn. I'd say it was about 6 months ago or so. And one of my friends that I've done a podcast with on my podcast, Biotech Bytes, he's a CIO at a biotech, and he disagreed with me. He said, "Well, AI can figure that out. AI knows about different personalities and different inflections in your voice." He said, like, for example, when there's a gap in there, the AI may pick up that the person's not totally telling the truth, or the person isn't as strong as they should be in that technology. And I shot back and I said, what if English is their second language? What if they pause during that sentence to try and think of the right word? Is AI going to know that? I don't think so. At least not yet. I mean, maybe
Right.
someday it will. So I don't think that we're replacing matching EQ with what the firm needs, but then you're also using your own knowledge and ability that you've gained over the years of interviewing folks to understand. Doing this for 26 years, I can pick up on somebody pretty quickly on the phone, right? And you've been doing it for a long time too, right? So and you can pick those inflections up, and you know what's going on the other end, as opposed to just straight up looking at skills and saying, well, they're a match or they're not a match. I had I'll make another point. I had a friend that went to a large company, a real large company in this country, and she was recruiting for them. She was on a contract. Well, she only made it 3 days because they were telling them to use AI to find the folks. Don't interview them. Don't talk to them. Don't gain any knowledge. Just forward it to the hiring manager. And she's like, "Well, what am I doing then?" She's more of the relationship kind of person, and that's why I do so well with her because she likes storytellers, and she's a storyteller herself. So anyway.
Well, and I think the cultural match is so important too, right? Because how many times, and I've seen this myself, um, somebody who comes from a very large enterprise organization now is at more of a startup. They don't necessarily know how to function in that
No.
environment at all because they're used to having layers and layers of management, bureaucracy, and people and teams. And you go to a startup and you're hands on in that environment. And I think being able to translate experiences or ask the right questions of somebody to understand, are you actually going to be able to make it in this type of
It's a
environment or not is
huge
huge.
difference. Yeah, it's a huge
Yeah.
difference. The
Yeah.
the person at the small company, and one gentleman put it pretty plainly to me several years ago. When you're at a small company, you're your own strategy. You have to develop your own strategy for everything you do. When you're at a big company, even when you're high up at a big company, strategy is given to you. This is what you're going to eat for lunch. Figure out how you're going to eat it. When you're at a small company, they're like, well, I don't even know if we have lunch, but you figure out how to go kill it, and maybe you'll get lunch today. I'm not too sure. Oh, and by the way, there's no forks and knives, so figure that out too. So it is a totally different mindset. I agree with you. It's night and day. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about the industry that you're in because I think it's so fascinating to have a niche and be so incredibly successful like you've been over the past, 2+ decades. What are you seeing when it comes to the types of talent? What is this industry is moving so quickly right now,
It
right? And
is.
there's so much going on in it. Like, how are you seeing needs evolve from these companies that are, trying to get things to market more quickly? And, there's just so much happening.
Yeah, I think that with the technology that's coming of age, to go back to it, AI. I mean, it's certainly a huge, huge advancement, and it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger. On my podcast, what all the CIOs talk about is before we get to that technology, which is awesome technology, we got to make sure that a little further, upstream, our data's ready to be fed into that AI because it's all about it just consumes data because it's got to figure out what the trends are, what we're doing, or how to process something or how to think about something. But it takes data to do that. It doesn't just do that in a vacuum. And if your data is not ready for that, I mean, and I asked several of these CIOs that are on my podcast, what's the one thing you would do? And they all talk about the data. It's the gasoline that feeds the technology/AI engine. And if the data is not ready, you could build the greatest technology. It doesn't really matter. So what I'm seeing is a change they've always liked, you had data warehousing, then you had data lakes, and you had big data. It's all kind of led into this, right? It all has led into this. We've just changed the name over the years. But, about business intelligence and analytics and AI, it's all kind of led into the same thing, but data is becoming much more prevalent. And I'm also seeing the PE firms and venture capital firms really get into the data side of things from every angle, all the way to the generation of the data, right? With the CROs, they're buying up CROs and such so that they can actually not only own the data, but own the generation of the data, right? And just get it out to wherever it needs to go because data is everything right now. It's you're superwoman if you got data, you're Superman.
Yeah, and the data piece, even from a recruiting perspective, is so key, right? I mean, data informs everything. It helps you make decisions. There's so many things there. You know, I've seen so much where hiring managers just they don't understand recruiting. Just get me the right person. Let me talk to them. End of story. Done with it. Like because they're taking that data angle to it. Are they a better judge
No,
of talent? Or still
no,
nothing? Not it.
no.
Hasn't evolved there.
No, it hasn't because
Mm.
data is so they don't know what they don't know, right? And so they need somebody to handle their data, whether it's data curation, whether it's data engineering, whether it's data quality, whether it's data cleansing, whether it's data gathering, whatever it is. I had one gentleman. I can give you a million examples. I had one gentleman come to me who was a VP in a medium sized pharmaceutical company, took a new role, and he calls me. He says, "I have associate directors and directors of data science, and they're triaging our data. They're fixing our data. And I'm spending, for an associate director, you're going to spend anywhere from 200 to 250 on the base plus bonus and equity and such. He said, I shouldn't be spending that much. I said, no, you shouldn't. I said, what you could do if you really wanted to is you could create a farm team at your company. You could hire, maybe even data science type of kids out of school
Yeah.
or data engineering kids out of school where you would have, promise them 2 years, 2.5 years in that role, right? Otherwise their brains would go numb if they went longer than that, but they can change your data and they can work on your data and they can get to know your business and they can get to know your company. They can handle your data for you and triage that data. And they're getting 80, 100, 120 at tops, right? Base. And then they can feed it to your data science director or associate director, but promise them that they're going to move into. So it's almost like a training program. Like I said, it's almost like their minor leagues, which would be a great thing, I think, for some of these organizations. And that's just one idea or one example I can come up with, but they haven't gotten better at judging that. And they all are trying to figure out how to find the right mix. I had another CIO come to me once with a company and they said, she said, I need a head of AI. I said, okay, cool. What does that mean? Like, what are we solving for? Right. Cause we got to know when we're putting AI in place, what's the use case? What are we solving for? Well, I just don't want to be left behind. I'm like, I'm not your guy. That's in 3 months. If you don't know what you're solving for, you're going to create this long math equation. It's not going to be solvable. And then it's going to be my fault because I got the wrong person because I didn't know what I was looking for, or why.
Yeah, and that's the crucial question, right? It's not why are you looking for this? What skills do we need here? But what are you trying to solve for? Like, what is the
Right.
pain in your organization that filling this particular role is going to solve? And I don't think enough companies think about that. To your point, it's like, well, I don't want to be left behind, or we've heard so and so has this title, so we need that in our organization, or whatever it is, without really thinking about the business impact that the role can make.
Because when I look at something or when we see something, the folks that know what they want and the folks that have a timeline and to fill it, and the ones that are the best to work with, sorry to say, are the ones that, like you just said, do have pain. What is the pain point? So
Right.
it's real defined. The pain's right here. So let's solve to make sure this pain goes away. And the business has that pain. Everybody has that pain. So the resources, both from a time perspective and a financial perspective, are put behind solving that pain point, right? With AI, it's more right now with that technology, it's more, well, I don't know. Somebody was golfing with somebody over the weekend and they said they're making a lot of money on it and it's the thing they're supposed to be doing. So they need to put it in place. And is that a pain point or is that a kind of a FOMO? It's more of a FOMO kind of thing. A lot of it. Now, don't get me wrong. There are use cases when we're reviewing contracts, when we're going through a lot of clinical data or on the research side, right? It's been put in place with a lot of research organizations. So there are a bunch of use cases and there's a lot. So to sort of prove that point, this past Christmas, I had a panel CIO discussion with, I think eight or 10 CIOs. Anyway, and then the Christmas before kind of talked to the same group. So 2 Christmases ago, there was one use case between those 8 or 10 folks. This Christmas, they each had 4 or 5 use cases. So it's
Yeah.
moving. It's
Yeah.
cool stuff. It's great, but
Yeah. It's
we're still
great.
getting there.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you touched on a little bit ago, and that was, encouraging somebody who said, why am I paying X number of dollars to this data scientist? I shouldn't be paying this much. Right. And you came back with, well, here's an idea.
Mhm.
Let's look at maybe bringing in somebody out of college, give them some experience, but at least have a plan then to move them into another role. I feel like there aren't enough companies out there providing that type of consultative experience to their clients. It's just about, I've got this need. Okay, here, let me help you with it. Right.
Right.
And I think too often, and I know I found myself guilty of this as well, when you're in that environment, that situation, that pain, whatever it is, you can't really, you're limited in your thinking.
Yeah.
Bringing somebody else in who's got a fresh perspective, not connected to it, has some subject matter expertise for sure, can say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Right?
Right.
Here are some options for you. Talk a little bit more about how you do, all of us that are trying to help clients solve these talent related issues can maybe do a better job of really taking a step back and providing some counsel and thinking about solutions.
Yeah, I think we're too quick to jump to, if I own a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? So let's think about what we're thinking about. Let's look at the whole landscape. When we're talking to a company, if it's a small company and they need a head of IT, okay, well, let's think about that. Are you about to go commercial? Do we need somebody with commercial? Are you more focused on your research? Is your founder, which lots of times they are scientists, right? So maybe we got to have somebody with R&D in there. Maybe you were just breached, security breach. Maybe you need somebody that's more focused on security, so there's a lot of different things. And I think we jump too quick to, okay, let me get your resume. Well, whoa, 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 whoa. What do we, because lots of times, even when you're inside a company, even if you're a project manager, business analyst, whatever you are, you need to sit down with the business and understand what they need, even when you're inside. So
Mhm.
why can't we do that externally? Right. So
Right.
let's sit
Right.
down and let's talk to them. And I know they say they need X, but let's understand what X means. I've even spoken to a lot of CIOs who, to further this point, they hire people to come into their company, and first thing they do is they basically, when it comes to AI, let's all get on the same page. Here's the terminology. Here's what a here here's what a web browser is. Here's what an ISP is, like from the 90s, right? When nobody knew what any of the internet stuff was. So same thing with AI right now. That's kind of where we are. We're in the Wild West, and let's all get on the same page. Just like when somebody comes to you with a potential search or a potential problem that they have, maybe they don't have a problem. They come to you and
Right.
they say, hey, I need X or I need Y or I need Z. Well, let's talk about that. Let's think about what we really need. And I'll go back through my 26 years of experience. This is where the science part comes in, right? Because I think what we
Yeah.
do is half science, half art. And so you get the science part of it, but then there's a lot of art, right? Because you got to kind of figure out what fits where. Because no situation is exactly the same as it was as some other. So
Right. And what somebody asks for is not necessarily what they need,
and they
right?
don't know that, right?
And they don't know that, right?
Yeah,
And that's why having a conversation with them to really understand, maybe you, and I've had this before, I may not be the one to solve it for you because now I truly understand what it is, but I am more than happy to introduce you to somebody who can, right?
100%. I've
And
done
that's
that.
that's the best that there's nothing wrong with that
I've done
either.
that a ton. And you know what? Quite
Yeah.
frankly, you get a lot of respect when someone says, because, like, I don't know how to fix a brake. I'm more a starter motor kind of guy, right? But let me show you the brake specialist, right? Same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah.
just can't do that. That's not my wheelhouse. I've never worked on the brakes of an Acura, only VWs, or you know what I mean? So whatever it is. And when you get the respect of somebody, you didn't waste their time, but they'll stay in touch with you. And if they do have a need, if their Acura does break, they'll come back to you on that one, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. I've always been a big fan of that. I was taught that very early on by someone, and you're right. You earn respect and they'll come back to you again. You may not be helping them right now, but they will remember it and they'll come back to you for sure. Where do you see the biggest risks? Or you could maybe look at the other way. Maybe you want to talk about the opportunities. I'm not sure. I'll let you decide. But, for the industries that you're working with right now and for the types of positions that they come to you to help fill, like, what are you seeing going on in the industry right
I
now?
think the biggest, well, I'm going to go back to the data thing, right? I mean, it's the biggest opportunity for these organizations to really get to the next level, and they're doing it. Unfortunately, there's no way that they can't share their data, right? So there are big opportunities, and like I said, the PE firms have figured that out. So they're buying up these little data companies, and these data companies. And when I say little, they're not the size of IQVIA or whatever, but they're not super small, but they're smaller. I think the biggest opportunities are in the data and the data cleansing and the data curation and selling the data, and making sure that the data is ready for AI, because AI is not going away. The technology is not going away. It's here to stay, and it should be, and it's going to make us all better, faster, smarter. Um, so I think the biggest opportunity is the data, but the biggest risk is the data too, because if we don't check what we're doing, and this stuff starts hallucinating or learning on itself from wrong data, that's a race to the bottom, right? So we got to make sure we're doing it all right from the get go. Again, I asked several CIOs what they see as, if you were a new CIO coming into your company, Mr. or Mrs. CIO, what would you suggest I think about? And almost all of them said, get your data ready. Watch your data. Think about your data. Now, there's a security component around data too, right? So we got to think about all that too. And a lot of them have been forced to do that. And a lot of the boards of directors focus on obviously security, but also the governance around AI. And what they really mean is governance around the data. Who's taking our data? Where's it gone? That kind of stuff. So That's a huge, huge component. And that is a risk, big risk for them.
What are you most excited about when you think about the industry? And I'm specifically talking about not the biotech industry, but the business of recruiting and talent and all of that. What excites you the most when you think about the few years ahead? Like again, with AI being incorporated, and it doesn't have to be again with AI, but just where the industry's headed.
I never get asked this question, which is awesome.
Really?
Yeah, swear to God, but I love
No.
it. No, because I think about it all the time. Um, the thing that excites me the most is where we are right now and where we're heading. Right. So, by that I mean I think that there is. We just talked a minute ago about the pain. When there's pain somewhere, you get to help and solve it. And where the pain is growing, and it's going to continue to grow, and we're all going to be able to solve it because we've all been riding this bike for so long, is there's going to be a huge gap in, again, I'll go back to it, the work in the middle. We're getting away from the work in the middle. And the longer this goes unaddressed, the tighter that spring's going to get and the harder it's going to pop and the more the need's going to be there for folks that it's a human business. We're still people. That's not going to change. That's not going away. I mean, for the last 100,000 years, right? So it's people hiring people, which adds to a culture, which adds to a bottom line, which adds to everything, right? It's not computers hiring people. It's not AI hiring people. We can, again, use that to identify, which is perfect. That's what we're supposed to do. But that work in the middle to really understand your drivers and what you need and what you want and where you're going and where you want to go, that's what I'm here to solve, to help you get to where you want to go. But then the company as well, because the company's not going to know. A lot of companies think they're getting away with something when they hire somebody for a lower salary. And I coach them on that because guess what? Someone's going to come in and pick them off. And now you're doing this again. You don't want to do this again. And they don't like hearing that they got to pay 15,000 more for this person. But, if you're going to pay them 120 versus 135, someone else is going to come in at 140 in a year. If you're 125 or you're 120 or you're 135, big gap, 140 to 135, small gap, right? So anyway, so I think that there's going to be a lot of need and a lot of ability for folks that have been a whatever you want to call it, a talent consultant, like we've all been. It's just going to grow more and more because right now there's a lot of folks that are, quite frankly, leaving the industry. They've had enough. They're just like, I'm out, I'm done. Selling their businesses or just walking away or both. My mom, like I said, she did this forever. She's still alive and she's 86 now. So, but she walked away probably 5 years ago. She just said, uncle, had enough. Sometimes she wishes she could come back in, but she's like, technology got away from me. But the fundamentals never go away. 75, 80% of it's still the same, So
Yeah.
that's what I'm sorry to say. Back to basics is what excites me. I don't know.
Well, and that's true, right? Because like we were talking about earlier, being able to understand what motivates somebody, what they're looking for out of their career, out of the next step for them, right? It may not align with what the company's offering. And I just got a text message this morning from somebody who's in an organization very unhappy with, I don't want to say a policy that came out, but just the CEO documenting what the expectations were. And for her, she was unhappy about it and somebody else wouldn't be. So, she has the skill. She's obviously successful there, but doesn't like, one of the things is we want our people to be internally on teams on camera. She doesn't like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, but they feel that as very transparent and being connected and present with each other. And she doesn't want to, right? So again, there's nothing right or wrong, but she just doesn't like that environment.
Not for
And
her. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not for her. Yeah.
Yeah. That's part of what I think. I got to be honest with you. That's part of why I think internal recruiters, and any internal recruiter that watches this is going to say I'm crazy, why I think internal recruiters are at a disadvantage to what we do externally. Because when I call somebody, if I call you to interview you, you don't have a description in front of you. You don't know the name of the company yet. You're going to know that by the end of my call, and you're going to have the description by the end of my call. First things first, let's talk about you. What are your drivers? Where do you want to live? How often are you going to go into the office? What's your personality like? And you can pick that up on the phone. What kind of place have you worked at, right? We can tell big, small, we can tell consulting, whatever. We go through all that, and skill sets and things like that. And then, by the end of the conversation, they're going to know the company, they're going to know the manager, they're going to know the dollars, but I know all that stuff, what they want before they know this. So they can't feed me back an answer that fits what they think I'm looking for. That's why I think the internal recruiters are at disadvantage, because by the time they apply to the internal, they know the company, they know the location, they have a good idea of the salary because usually it's listed at the bottom, all this different stuff, and so they can say what they need to say maybe to get by. Again, I'm only putting someone in that's already told me, or I'm even only proceeding with the description and telling them about the company and the manager, unless I know it's going to be a fit, you know? So I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I just like what I do too much. I'm not quite sure. Maybe a combination of both. But yeah, I think it's tough for an internal recruiter to navigate that. And I'm not sure how I would, because I've always done it this way, the way I just described to you. So I don't know. Anyway.
Oh, absolutely. So last question for you. I love asking this question because then I get to learn something new as well. What are you reading, listening, paying attention to right now? Like, doesn't have to be related to your profession. Could
Yeah, no, I do a lot of reading about business, right? I read Barron's and I read a lot of those publications just to kind of, in a big picture, stay up on that. I also, if you so in my podcast, I always talk about music. I'm big into music, live music. So I'm actually right now we're doing a music fest in a couple of weeks, my wife and I here in New Jersey. So I'm in the process right now on our Sonos in the office of listening to all the little bands and stuff. And I'm texting my daughters and my wife and saying, you ever heard of this person? One of my daughters earlier today was like, yeah, I just downloaded her album today, Dad. I think you'd like that, so I don't know. Music's always been something that I think I don't know how else to phrase it. This may sound corny, but certain albums and certain bands appeal to it's the human thing, right? Kind of going back to the work in the middle. It's not the same for everybody. So certain bands can cleanse your soul, a Neil Young or a Pearl Jam or something, that just, or whatever, hit you the right way, or some people could hit the wrong way. Right. So, and everybody's experience in the crowd or in that, or even listening to that album during that particular day is a different experience. So I don't know. Yeah, give you that answer. I'm sorry. That's kind of where I sit on that. So
No, that's great. I love that. I love that. It has been such a pleasure talking with you. We could, I'm sure, talk for the next 3 hours and kept going on a variety of topics. Maybe we'll have to do this again sometime. But I really, really appreciate your time today. As for our listeners, as Steve said at the top of the show, he's got a podcast called Biotech Bytes. So feel free to tune in and listen to that as well. As always, anyone listening, if you have any ideas, suggestions, topics, anything you want us to dive into, certainly drop us a note and let us know. But Steve, thank you again for your
thank you.
time
Thanks for having me.
and enjoy your afternoon.